It might be reasonable in Eastertide to think that our readings from the Gospels come after Christ's resurrection. But that's not true this week, and it won't be true for a couple succeeding weeks. If you want to enter today's story from the Gospel of John, you have to rewind the clock. Go back before the resurrection, go back before the crucifixion, go back before the arrest, and find yourself with Jesus and the disciples as Jesus is saying farewell. And his farewell is a little bit complicated. And so the disciples have some questions. Jesus is talking about going away, and Thomas, and I would imagine the others, don't know where Jesus is going, so Thomas bravely, I think, asked the question, Jesus, we don't really know where you're going, so how are we supposed to follow you there, right? Like, map, GPS, something would be helpful. Something would be helpful. And Jesus kind of answers, but in the Gospel of John, it's always kind of esoteric. So then the next one to ask the question is Philip. And you can hear the desperation edging into Philip's voice. Jesus seems to be saying goodbye, but the disciples have given up years of their lives and time with their families and their fishing careers to, follow him. And so Philip says, if you would just show us God, we would be satisfied. This kind of desperation to understand what Jesus is talking about and to follow where he's going. And I think, we have the benefit of the New Testament and all of Paul's theology and a millennia or so of reflection upon it, but not these guys. Context is everything. They're sitting here by the lamplight, and Jesus is saying he's going away. And in these chapters in John, Jesus is trying so hard to get his disciples to understand. They have followed him. They've heard everything he said. They've seen everything that he's done. They've experienced a kind of intimacy with him, walking and living with him like no one else. They've got all the information that they need. They have all the empirical evidence at their disposal. But Jesus knows it's all about to get more confusing and more complicated because he's going to be crucified. And so he's trying to get them to turn back a little bit the quest for information and empirical evidence and move to a deeper place. The word believe comes 6 times in today's gospel passage, if I counted correctly. Jesus is talking about the things of the heart. Can the disciples believe? And so it's not so much that he doesn't answer Thomas or Philip, it's that he redirects them. Thomas wants a map, like an empirical thing that will show him the way. And Jesus turns it on its head and he says, Philip, you do know the way, because I am the way. And of course, in the Gospel of John, I love those statements, the I am statements, because John is going back to when Moses didn't want to do a thing that God wanted him to do, and to get out of it, Moses is like, how am I supposed to go? I don't even know what your name is. And God is like, I'll tell you my name. My name is, I am who I am. And every time in John's Gospel when Jesus says, I am, he's talking about who he really is. It's the divine name, the divine identity. I am the way. And of course, he's playing on what the way means here. Jesus is literally going to walk a dusty dirt path to death. It's a way that he will walk. But that's the empirical side. The other side is he's going to walk away to death that actually leads to life. That as this faith confesses, Jesus Christ goes to death in order that nothing ever separate us from God again. The way of Jesus is the way to God, opened up forever, for all time, for all people. Thomas, I am the way. You don't need any more empirical evidence. You've watched me live and speak. Can you believe? Can you look at it from a deeper perspective? And maybe it is that Philip doesn't get it, or maybe it's that that's hard. And so Philip says, if you could just show us the Father, Jesus' name for how he understands God, if you could just show us God, that's all we need. And you can hear Jesus gently saying, Philip, how long have we been together? How many meals have we shared? How many paths have we walked? How much have you seen? How much will be enough for you? Because don't you know, to see me, Jesus Christ, is to see the Father? I've been with you all this time, says Jesus. And that's what this faith confesses, that Jesus Christ is fully God. That to look at Jesus Christ is to look at God. And so if we think that God is something other than what Jesus Christ demonstrates, a reevaluation is in order. The healing Jesus does, the teaching, the time he spends with Mary and Martha, the time he spends at the table with sinners and outcasts, right? That is God. God is nothing other than what Jesus Christ does. You have seen me, says Jesus. How much more evidence do you need? But can you give your heart to it? Can you trust it? Can you trust it? See, I don't find that particularly easy to do, to trust it, right? I'm more like, maybe I'm putting words in Thomas's mouth, or Philip's mouth. If I were there, I'd be like, well, okay, if you're God, why are you here as a person? That's confusing. And why didn't you turn those stones into bread so all my hungry neighbors could be fed? And, if you're about the business of ending oppression, then why don't you get on and do it? Why don't you get rid of the Romans? Why don't you get rid of all of the things that kill people who aren't the same as other people, who take advantage and chokehold people or otherwise, leaving them dead? Why don't you do something about that, Jesus? Or how about all of my people and friends and people I don't even know whose hearts are broken? Why don't you mend those? Trust you? I don't know. That's pretty hard to do. But for me, maybe it's that the quest for the empirical evidence is pretty seductive. That the desire for a map that tells me that I've found truth, that I know the answer, there's something about that I'd like to have. But can you trust me, says Jesus. And that's just the rub. That this faith is about an invitation to a relationship with the God who is relational. Can you trust it? I can look at my life and see the serendipity of God threading through the years. I can look at the lives of the people I know and see God present in those places. I didn't exactly have the tangible experience of Philip or Thomas, but I do have some empirical evidence. And I could call it coincidence. I could also say that, when you're looking for God in your life, you find God in your life, and it's a psychologically calming event to do so. Or I could take the invitation of God that Jesus is offering his disciples in this moment and put aside all of the information I think I need and all the empirical evidence I keep pursuing, and take a moment and draw a deep breath and descend to something deeper. We live most of our lives in the top 3 inches of our being. Information, information, information. But there's a place deep within us also where truth resides. It's the place of emotion. It's where creativity dwells. It's where human connection and love and spirituality live? And I think Jesus invites his disciples in these farewell discourses and invites us to stop looking so much for the evidence because we'll never have enough, and to descend deeply into our hearts and find and ask ourselves, what do we really believe? What have we really experienced of God? How is the Spirit threaded through our lives? Not so much do we believe, yes, check yes to this clause of the Nicene Creed. It's not about fact. What is the truth of our life? Do we find Jesus Christ that he is the way? Is that our truth? Does it lead us into life? And I don't think it's a one-time choice. It's not as if, again, I say, well, I have chosen that Jesus is the way, and I'm going to go in it, because life isn't like that. Life is complicated. Diseases happen, and the death of our loved ones, and the world rages, and we lose our jobs, and our incomes become insecure, and we age. And so constantly we're asked, am I walking in the way? Am I finding the truth? Is it giving me life? And it's a relational enterprise. As we walk with God and yell our questions and raise our laments, how are we finding Jesus is with us? How are we on the way together? And is it a truth that informs our life? Does it hold us? Does it lead us to abundance? I think that's the invitation. To go into ourselves, to find the quiet. That's why this place talks a lot about spiritual practices, so that we find ourselves and we find God, and we know that they're in the same place deep within us. This passage begins, do not let your hearts be troubled. Because the truth is, God is in us and around us and comes to us before we ever respond back. We are already on the way, because Jesus Christ has lived and has died and has risen again. The invitation is for us to follow in the way, to find our truth in him, and to find our life and live it to the full in Jesus Christ. May God find us. May God give us what we need today and the next day to walk the road, to walk the way, with the one who is the way and the truth and the life.